Welcome to Triple Take Cinema. I am Alex. I'm here with my other two co hosts, Dustin and Kyle. Three dudes. Each episode, one of us picks three movies united by some common theme or element. In the past, we've done directors, we've done types of genre, and we've done obscure things like color. Today is the first time we're getting into an actor. Um, I could not resist picking Jack Nicholson, the most nominated actor for Oscars. I think he's got 12 noms. And I wanted to really delve into his 70s filmography. So we are going to be talking about Five Easy Pieces, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Chinatown. Three classics, three iconic characters and performances. And as we kind of dive into this, I would love to hear from you guys kind of what your relationship was to these three movies before watching them for this ep, and also how watching them uh, changed how you think about Nicholson as a performer. Dustin, let's start with you.
Yeah, so the only one of these three that I had any familiarity with was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I think I watched that with my dad for the first time when I was probably in my teens, early teens, or something like that. I feel like I had heard the name Five Easy Pieces at some point, but I don't even know if I connected it as a Nicholson movie or if I had no other conception of what it was. And then Chinatown was something that I feel like I had seen on lists. I don't even know if I directly associated it with Nicholson or not, but whatever conception I had of that film was wildly inaccurate to what it actually was. I don't think I realized it was directed by Polanski. Didn't really know much about it at all. And then, I mean, in terms of Nicholson, like my earliest Jack Nicholson experience, which I think is probably pretty common for our generation, is Batman. Uh,
I
and
knew you were going to say it before you did. It had to be.
yeah, I think so. Like that's probably like the first time I ever saw him in something. And then honestly, like I mean, I like The Shining. I love The Shining, but I didn't see that until I was like in college. Um, I do like one of my favorite movies of all time is The Departed. I think I saw that like 5 times in the theater. So that's like a huge iconic role for me when I think of him. I think most of my familiarity with him is definitely in the latter half of his career. Like prior to watching these, the only movie before Batman that I had seen him in was, well, actually not true, The Shining and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So I definitely like appreciated him as a dramatic actor and like that background and everything, but I had no other. I mean, these other two movies were very big blind spots to me, and Chinatown again was one that I feel like had uh, recurringly seen in like best of lists and things like that. But Five Easy Pieces I knew nothing about, and spoiler, like I loved both of those movies phenomenally. Like so, and as much as I do enjoy One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I think of the three, that's probably the weakest one here. Um, and we'll get into that more. But yeah, so these were definitely like hopefully are catalyzing me to look at more of his work from the early days of his career because these were all brilliant. Kyle, how
Yeah.
about you?
Uh, I'd seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest many, many times. When it comes to this, I had attempted when I was getting into watching movies with intent. I had attempted to watch Chinatown several times, and that's the only way I can say that is attempted to, because I was every time I started it, I was didn't finish it. And I had never. And I'm actually shocked by this, just because of the amount of movie podcasts that I have listened to, with greater or lesser degrees of their noses in the air. I'd never heard of Five Easy Pieces before this, and it was interesting to see some young Nicholson. I feel like the role that I associate Nicholson with the most is probably in A Few Good Men, and that sort of that that big scene with him and Cruz, both on its merits and because of how much I appreciated Aaron Sorkin's writing for a long time, and still do
I'm
most of it.
curious. I'm curious with Chinatown, like, were you just like unable to get interested in it, or was there something that turned you off from it initially?
I mean, if we want to get into Chinatown, we can certainly start off with Chinatown. But I find film noir painfully boring,
Mm-hmm.
painfully
Interesting.
boring, and I've never taken to any of that. There may be some. It probably is. It probably has some kind of film noir for me is kind of like country music, where if I like something that people would call country music, I'll be like, oh well, it's not country.
Mm.
A little bit of that going on, but I and it's interesting to watch it through this time. Actually see it all the way through. I was able to successfully turn my wife's eyes when they showed who the director was. Otherwise, she would have not watched it with me. But I did tell her that at the end. And yeah, I also yeah, I mean it's a movie that is very and I tried to. It's a movie that's very much Los Angeles. And when I was watching Chinatown, I was like, oh, this is a very bad version of LA Confidential in very broad strokes, right? Like just this ode to that time period, those people, that city, people doing messed up things. That's kind of what I was like, oh, what I like. I see where a lot of LA Confidential and just this genre came from, but also specific to the LA world. And just feel like sometimes, yeah. So for Chinatown, it's that I find film noir very difficult to get through. There's not enough happening. The pacing is very slow, and I don't think the stakes are all that interesting to me in this movie. So that's yeah. So that I tried a couple times with Chinatown, and I'd always just sort of tried like, all right, we're going to sit down and watch this movie that's pretty universally regarded as one of the better movies ever made, and we're gonna do it. And without a structure like this, or without watching it, with another group of people where you're all sort of invested to getting to the end and having something to say, it never took for me when I was on my lonesome. So again, good work on the podcast to get me to buckle down and see something through. And
Yeah,
then
I mean
yeah,
that resonates with me just because I also tried in college to watch Chinatown, and I just don't think I had the patience for it, the attention span for it. And this watch, it definitely was a slow burn. And I'm gonna give a slight spoiler for my rankings at the end, and say that Chinatown was my favorite of three movies that I pretty much loved all of these to varying degrees, but just the mastery of the script, of the direction, of all these themes coming together totally blew me away this time. And I was going to have us end with Chinatown, but let's get into it and let's kind of go reverse chronological. We'll start with Chinatown, 1975, directed by Roman Polanski, with a script by, um, I believe it's Robert Town. It is, and yeah, when I tried to watch this in college, I think I got all the way to the end, but my memories of it are very hazy. And I probably saw this for the podcast maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point, and uh, individual scenes are still like burned into my memory because of how strong of an impression they made on me. I even love that first scene with Curly, the kind of you know maybe comic relief character who ends up playing a big role at the end, where we're getting introduced to Nicholson's J.J. Giddies as kind of this slightly sleazy, hard-boiled detective, former cop, and just his delivery when he's talking to Curly and he's showing, sympathy for him and his situation, but what I think was interesting, Kyle, to your point about film noir, is that from the get-go, it feels like this is kind of undercutting a lot of those film noir tropes. Like you've got Curly like chewing on the Venetian blinds, and to me that's a very classic film noir like trope, is to have like the detective peering through the Venetian blinds, and here you've got this kind of sad sack just trying to eat him. And I think throughout this movie really undercuts your expectations about what's going to happen, and who is kind of hero and villain in this very dark kind of cynical story. But lots of directions we could take this in. Where do you guys want to go from here with Chinatown?
What were some of I'd like to what are some of those scenes that really grabbed you? Because I I can, yeah. What are some of those scenes that really grabbed you? I'm curious to hear some,
Yeah,
like, some, yeah. And I mean, Dustin, I'd love to hear some of the scenes that grabbed you as well, because I don't have one, so I'm curious as to what like really sunk its teeth into both of you.
yeah, I'll go first and then Dustin can take over. I really love the first scene where uh JJ Gitz is tracking Hollis Mulray, the water inspector, and he's at that city council meeting. And I just love the way that that plays out, where he's so laser focused, he doesn't give a shit until
The guy with the goats shows up.
yeah, until right, well, until the guy with the goats comes in. But he kind of yawns at the plight of the farmers, which is kind of a funny little joke when you're watching it. But thinking about it afterwards, if he had realized all those other pieces, he could have solved the mystery way sooner. So I just think there's a lot of interesting characterization happening at that scene. I love the performances. I love kind of, Hollis's like very stern, yeah, just, I won't build this dam. I love the confrontation scene where he gets his nose sliced open
By
by
Roman Polanski.
Roman Polanski. Absolutely. I think all the scenes with him and Faye Dunaway as who you think is the femme fatale, and then turns out to be kind of the heroine slash victim of the movie. I think the way those unfold are really narratively and dramatically compelling.
I have
Just to
seen,
interject,
yeah, yeah.
like I
Yeah,
thought
go for it.
the whole like the whole piece with Faye Dunaway and like her character not like it being clear that there was more to her story than she was sharing, even though like JJ was getting into like getting details and was like progressing and like unraveling whatever the hell was going on. The fact that there was like she was clearly withholding stuff, but while also giving up stuff, like I thought that was kind of compelling and interesting. Like there's constantly like new more layers to the onion of her story that kept getting pulled back, that kind of pulled me in right when I was starting to lose interest a little bit. Like when and I this is a good way, like I'm sorry to totally cut you off, Alex, but
No, you're fine. Get into it.
there was two things that he did as a detective that I thought were fucking awesome. One was in the beginning when he was following the water guy around and he, stalked him for hours. And then it was the middle of the night and the guy's car was parked over the cliff where he was. And he's like, I'm not going to fucking stay here the whole night. And so he goes into his glove box and there's like dozens of pocket watches. And he pulls out two pocket watches and he goes over and he puts them on both sides of one of the tires of the car. And I'm like, what the fuck is he doing? Fucking brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, like analog way to figure out how long the dude stayed there, because he put the pocket watches there so that when the guy moved his car, whether he went forward or backward, he ran over one of the pocket watches because he set them correctly when he pulled them out of his glove box. And then the guy he's following runs over the pocket watch, stops it at whatever time he ran it over. And then someone has to go physically pick him up, which his associate did. But like I just loved like learning like what he was doing there. And because at first I was like, what the fuck are you doing? I don't understand. And then the other thing that he did that I thought was really cool was after him and Faye Dunaway spend the night together, and she gets called away to go to the her butler's house, and but he doesn't know that. She just tells Nicholson like, I have to go, don't worry, like wait up or whatever. And she hops in the shower. Nicholson goes out and breaks one of her taillights. I thought he was breaking the headlights. At first I thought he was breaking the headlights so that she couldn't
I did
leave,
too.
but it turned out he was breaking one of the taillights so that he could better follow her in the dark and see where her car was by identifying it as the one with a broken taillight. And that was a catalyst into another scene of him going, like, that whole mystery there of like who that girl was that ended up being her daughter and her sister. I thought like that kind of unveiling was compelling. I mean, for me, what really sealed the deal in my enjoyment of this story was that end scene and how morose and sad and like
It's
truly
super fucking
tragic.
bleak. It's
Yeah,
incredibly
yeah,
dark and cynical.
totally tragic. Which is where the line of, you know, it's Chinatown comes from and stuff. And I will say, for a movie called Chinatown, disappointing lack of Chinatown in the entire movie. But um like I don't know. I think I saw LA Confidential last year for the first time and I really loved it. And Kyle, I won't disagree with you that like film noir is drawn out, is oftentimes more boring than not. But
It's
like,
formulaic. It has certain beats that it follows.
yeah, and like for me, I think what what makes a film noir movie enjoyable is maybe, you know, 10% of it is like an interesting, compelling mystery that's being solved. Many of them are very stereotypical, and you know, someone gets murdered. Like, not that that's not a bad thing, but like low stakes, as you said. But it's the actors and actresses and their performances that pull me in, and I feel like Nicholson's charm here, and something I look forward to talking about extensively when it comes to Five Easy Pieces, um, brings me into like wanting to see what his character uncovers, and like those nuggets of how he does his detective work. Like, I wish there was more of that, because that was probably the most interesting stuff to me, when he was like truly like going around and asking questions and figuring stuff out, and like had figured stuff out, at least for me, before I did as a viewer, and then he's explaining it to someone. I'm like, oh shit, yeah, like okay. Like when they go to the old folks home and are like talking to the old folks that don't know that their names are on all the property and stuff like that. All the scenes with him and John Huston and their conversations, and like
Hmm.
how polite those are, but also like there's something weirdly off about John Huston and his character, and like not knowing what that is until you find out at the end that like how real fucked up it is. Like, that was all the stuff in Chinatown that like kept me compelled. I will say, I'll give the caveat that like I didn't watch this in one sitting. I think I watched it across two sittings because I started it too late one night and couldn't stay awake for it. Um, but it I think that might have even furthered my enjoyment of it, because after like spending a night thinking about being halfway through it and like wondering, oh, like what about that? What was that for? When I came back to it the next day, I was like, no, I really want to see this like get resolved, kind of a thing. But for me, yeah, it was a lot of like, I don't think I would have enjoyed this. I'm sure there's other actors that I would have enjoyed in Nicholson's role here, but like a lot of it was enjoying him and his presence he brought to the role, that I feel like made it interesting to me.
I,
Yeah.
I certainly appreciated Jack Nicholson's performance. I did in Five Easy Pieces, which we can get into as well. I found Faye Dunaway's performance, and I don't know if this is what she was asked to do, and so I don't necessarily want to take. That's always a tricky line for me. Is like, what are they asked to do, and what do I see, and how much do I want to lay that at the feet of the actor? I found it to be difficult to watch, and would take me out of every scene that she was in. That sort of overly affected 60s, 70s woman character. I didn't. It's tricky to have that performance juxtaposed constantly with Jack Nicholson and his ability to deliver the character and the lines and the actions just flawlessly. Uh, Again, I don't know if she was asked to do that. I certainly think it's possible given the director we're dealing with here, but it was just hard for me to watch. I didn't believe that she believed what she was saying. I didn't in a sense of like those things you're talking about, Dustin, with like, oh, she would say things. It was obvious that she was holding things back. It felt like her performance to me felt so giving away all of the information so easily to a point like I don't want to be too harsh here, but whatever, like high school play style, like someone who's just like, oh, I get to be this character and yada yada yada, and I'm going to do this like overly affected stuff. Like it was so hard for me to watch that with all the other stuff that was going on. And you guys mentioned the scenes with Houston. You know, it takes a lot for me for a movie to kind of give me everything and still deliver. And I'm thinking a movie that did that effectively would be like Midsommar, like truly giving you everything and then delivering. I don't know if you've seen it, Dustin. I don't know if you've seen it, Alex.
I
Um,
have.
yeah, but yeah, I just like all those moments where I'm supposed to be interested because the movie's going along, and there's little bits of information being dropped that I'm supposed to um, be interested in. As soon as Houston's on the screen, I'm like, oh, this guy's obviously the devil. You know what I mean? Like there's a scene. These things just seem very clear to me with the information that I was being given on screen. Yeah, and I don't know. Just even like the saltwater, bad for grass stuff was like that type of. I don't know. It didn't. I'm not gonna like I didn't foresee them being sister and mother daughter whatever, like that weird connection. I'm not saying that I saw through this movie like a pane of glass, but there was nothing, that no piece of information that was given to me during this that I was like, oh. And now I'm like you said, Dustin, like you were sort of losing interest and then it pulled you back in. Like I never had those moments. And some of the more interesting scenes, I guess, for me are really any scene where you're getting completely decontextualized information, almost like, a la like Rear Window, where you're just seeing things happening with no sound. And so it's all left to your mind to kind of fill in those gaps, which can be very alluring as a viewer. Just that
Some of
like
those
voyeurism.
investigation detective scenes, I think that Dustin was talking about being compelling, where you're just watching, you know, Jake go about his work.
Yeah. And like, I did find that sort of interesting. And almost like you're watching a documentary aspect kind of thing of that stuff. The watch stuff is cool, and yeah, I mean
What's
just the
interesting,
dedication to the craft.
yeah. What jumped out to me, Kyle, is, everything you were talking about with Faye Dunaway as Evelyn Mulwray, is that there's definitely a falseness to her performance that I interpreted as inherent to the character of Evelyn, and for me, like, really worked and really tied back to who she is and what she's trying to do, where she, you know, is trying to come across as this uber confident, again, kind of femme fatale, but she's really a terrified victim. So I think that, like, that high school play acting impression that you got, for me, that was kind of deeply rooted in her character. But I could see, like, how, that wouldn't work, or that wouldn't feel authentic in the moment as you're watching her, especially when uh, Jake is someone who, for all of his faults and the fact that he doesn't really see the big picture, is very sure of who he is. And, you know, kind of he's grappling with the morality of what he's doing, but he thinks he's honorable. He defends himself. He sticks up for himself in that scene at the barber shop, and he lashes out at that guy for, implying that he's, doing slimy things, which he is to a degree. But yeah, that is kind of how I read Dunaway's performance is that like that facade and that falseness was, you know, her trying and failing to mask kind of her trauma.
Yeah, and I see that, which is why I kind of like really hesitate to be like, I think these are conscious choices, right? I don't think that much is happening here without Polanski's direction and like his touch and his desire to create what we saw. And I don't think he was. I think he accomplished his goal. I also think like and we can talk about this at the end, but I'm pretty sure I picked what I picked for the next tranche of movies because I really wanted to see some female characters that had any kind of like I don't know, strength is not necessarily the word, but yeah, it's
Agency,
just
maybe?
yeah, agency. I guess it was just like for like Faye Dunaway's character, and this is me rewriting the movie, which is not criticism. For me, it's like if I am creating that character, she breaks for sure at some point, and that's a big moment. But in order to keep that level of to keep that kind of lie going, that it's such a high profile type of place in a high profile family with all those things. I just think you'd have to be so much more rigid and precise and all that stuff and not be so easily, I don't know, broken, swayed, moved, affected by certain things. Again, maybe it's all just she's trying to have this come out in some way, but I don't know. It just, yeah, I mean, I also think it's noir, right? I do think it is the genre for me as well. Like her character that's kind of a lot of what you're looking for, and that the way that
Yeah.
information is given, the way that it unfolds is true to the project. And so it's just one of those movies where I can be like, yeah, I always
It's
kind of,
Chinatown.
yeah. I can, the goal feels accomplished. I just like, I just I never gave a shit, and
did
I
you
think that,
did you like LA Confidential?
yes, because
I
in
mean, I feel
LA
like
Confidential,
there's more going on there for sure.
there is, but what there isn't, in my opinion, in this movie, if I'm just like off the rip, like talking about LA Confidential versus this movie, Guy Pearce's character, there's no corollary to Guy Pearce's character in this movie. There's
Oh
no, and
yeah,
I don't need like a moral hero in every movie, to whatever, but I guess I sometimes struggle with movies where I don't feel like there's anyone to root for,
yeah.
and I'm just
Five
kind
easy
of along.
pieces.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get into that too. Yeah, he's motherfucker. Yes, it's just challenging when there's no one to root for in this complete mucked up world, where
Yeah,
there is very little redemption, and you're just like at the end of it, it's Chinatown. I guess we'll just move on. And I
yeah.
also I just struggle with Los Angeles. Like I don't like Los Angeles as a place, and so the obsession that movie makers have with it for good reason, obviously, and kind of how LA can be this thing that can give movies a power because of the hype machine of LA. As much as I did like it, I think about something like La La Land, where movie directors like making movies about Hollywood. I mean, it's like it's a thing. You know what I mean? And so, not
It's
that this is about
interesting.
Hollywood, but it's
Yeah,
it's Los Angeles.
it's interesting to me that you're expressing that disdain for LA, for lack of a better word. Not that I dis. I mean, not that it's not an opinion you're totally entitled to have, but I would argue that like I agree with like I don't find LA or present modern day or recent modern day LA to be a particularly compelling uh, set or background or environment for film. But I guess from an N of three, I would say that I think like early turn of the century of the 20th century LA to me is compelling. Like pre-industrial, like early days LA, I think I'm coming around to the idea that I find it to be interesting, but it also might be caveated by like that time frame of like the 20s and 30s kind of a thing. And my N of three being this LA Confidential and then LA Noir, the video game, like that I find to be enjoyable and fun. Um, but I also do like I also don't find like New York to be like I don't like mobster movies that much, and like New York in the 1920s and 30s I don't find super interesting. I think what LA is more compelling to me about it is like in that time frame is that it is this bridge between urban and rural much more than you get on anything on the East Coast in that time frame. And uh, I think this movie in particular like portrayed that really well of a developing LA. I mean, the water thing being a huge plot point in it alone, like I
Right.
just felt like that environment to me in the last few years I'm coming around to realize like, oh yeah, like there's it's kind of like a blind spot to me in terms of understanding I'm sure there are a lot of blind spots in US history for me, but like in more recent US history, like pre-industrial LA is still a an interesting set piece for me. And but I totally can like empathize with the fact I mean going back to comparing this to LA Confidential, not that there I mean all the storylines in LA Confidential I think ultimately intersect, but there are different there's multiple leads in that movie. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have these different narratives that if one's not doing it for you, there's two or three other opportunities to hook into it and get interested, and then
Yeah.
those paths kind of intersect and whatnot. Here, if it's not a central narrative, it's the narrative, and if that story, that mystery, is not compelling to you, this movie is going to be a slog.
It's a long movie too. If you're not like really, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It
and I mean,
is.
and that's what we talked. I mean, a little bit earlier, like noir in general, like it moves. It moves at like if you're lucky, three quarters of like normal pace
Yeah.
is what it feels like. And so I feel like by and large, like, yeah, I could argue that this movie, you could have trimmed quite a bit of fat off of this if you really wanted to, and like probably wouldn't work today. I will say, I'm
But then you would
curious.
lose those scenes that you really liked, Dustin,
Yeah,
like of him with the watch, and that you were even saying you appreciated, Kyle, was those, kind of dialogue-less scenes of just watching the action unfold. I think you do lose something by having a more heavily edited version of this story where you don't get to follow along on those steps. And I do want to jump in on the LA part of the conversation real quick and say that I agree with LA being played out as a movie setting and kind of the navel gazy, you know, fetishization, for lack of a better word, that Hollywood often does when it's setting movies in LA. I really liked how, again, that was undercut here with LA being kind of this. Again, it's smoke and mirrors. It's this kind of city built on a desert where they're manufacturing this water crisis to exploit farmers out of their land and then sell it for a profit. Like I thought that bit of satire was kind of a fresh take on, to use your example, Kyle, the La La Land Hollywood. And in terms of this being pre-industrial, I thought there was a really nice visual texture to all the different locations we go to, where we've got the seedy office scenes, we've got kind of the mahogany of Mulray and the other engineers like office. You've got the orange groves where everything's really lush when Jake goes out to confront those farmers. And yeah, it takes a while getting there, but we do end in Chinatown, and we do end with that like very classic, you know, neon nighttime cityscape. Um, so I think it uses the LA setting in really interesting ways, and I think thematically it subverts kind of the myth and the allure of LA to a really cynical place where it's like, no, this is all corruption and deceit and despair, and it's cyclical, like the same shit that happened to Jake when he was a cop and he was powerless to do anything in Chinatown happens at the end of the movie. And as famous as that line is, like, forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. I think my favorite moment in the ending is when he kind of whispers to Escobar, um, where he like mumbles like as little as possible, implying like that's what you do if you're a beat cop in Chinatown, is you do literally as little as possible to not disrupt the status quo. And that's why Escobar freaks the fuck out and kind of, goes to attack him, is because he really hits a nerve. But yeah, I kind of jumped from talking about the setting to talking about the ending there. But those are things I think I appreciated about how it played with Hollywood and how it takes you to all these different places. Dustin, you were saying that the ending like is when this really locked in for you and kind of brought the picture together. Is that What was your experience with that kind of very famous last 5-10 minutes, Kyle?
I guess by that time I'm so far out of it because the scene where he kind of confronts him and he's got the glasses and there's nothing to be done, and he like that from that all the way to the end. I'm I'm just at that point. I mean, truly, I'm just wanting it to be over because it's and I don't so much then is smashed at the end, and I don't know, they're just shooting at her, and then they get her, and the daughter's sister is screaming in that way that's just so what I'm talking about, that's turning me off. I mean, so in truth, I don't like it. Yeah, there was no satisfaction on any level, and I mean, maybe that's the point. Maybe that's part of the point. I don't think I think that certainly is, but yeah, I mean, I guess at that point, like I said, I have no one to root for. I'm not rooting for anyone in this
Yeah,
story, and so I don't really care what happens to anyone. And Houston is so creepy at the end with how he's behaving that it's just like so utterly distasteful.
it's almost. I
And
feel like you came to like the same conclu- conclusion's not the right word, but like the same resolution in your like emotional resolution to this film as like Alex and I did, but for like a completely different reason and like disconnected. Like, yeah, like I mean, not because like we enjoyed the material very much and like enjoyed the film and felt completely gutted and like just miserable at the end. Like
Yeah,
you also felt miserable at the end, but
mhm,
like for like a complete opposite
right.
reason, kind of a
Very
thing.
different experiences, even though we
Yeah.
ended up emotionally at similar
Yeah,
places. That's
and
really
and I
funny.
mean, again, like the rationale, like the pathway to get to those emotions, drastically different path. So like different iterations of that emotion, but it's just kind of funny to me that like, yeah, like this is not a feel good movie. You
no,
think, I mean, if you're invested in it, as I was, like it seems like there's going to be a maybe not a positive end, but like a somewhat hopeful end. And the opposite direction it goes is like literally like the worst possible scenario between Faye Dunaway dying, her sister, daughter, conceivably going back with her father, grandfather,
Grandfather. Yeah.
and like Jake not having, any sort of resolution that he had like tried to move the pieces on the chessboard to make happen and stuff. And so like, yeah, I just think that's funny to me that like, yeah, like you were equally miserable, but for a completely different reason because you just like did not feel connected or interested or engaged in with it. So your misery really just came from the experience of having to watch it for this podcast.
I mean, yeah, and it's good to it's good to it's good to push your boundaries. It's good to see things, and I don't want people to come away thinking I hate every movie about LA because it's about LA.
Oh
It's
no.
obviously not the
But
case, but there's
it
times
seems
when
like. Go ahead. Sorry.
there's times when it feels like it's used as a background, uh, as a way to just kind of raise the floor, right? Like very
Yeah.
similar to how New York is used. I don't want to say New York isn't used this way as well. I totally agree with you. But and like mob, I agree with you on like mobster movies and that whole thing. Like it's got to be, it's very specific for me. And this is going way off to the left, but like what I want from some of these genres, like when you're talking about undercutting stuff, Alex, and kind of subverting things and like reimagining, but still sticking true to a lot of the stuff that it's reimagining at the same time. I think about like a mobster movie like Road to Perdition. Did either
That's
you
when I
see
got to
Road to Perdition?
revisit. I
I have to
saw it
see that.
20,
It's a
20
mobster.
some years ago.
Yeah, it's a mobster movie that like they're all connected to some city, but none of it takes place in any place that's like, ooh, this place is cool. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And even it's not even like taking place in New York adjacent in New Jersey like The Sopranos does. Like it's so like country and out there and like old. Yeah, I don't know, but that's the kind of thing that, so there's so much going. I love that movie. There's so much going on there, but it takes like what could have very easily been a story done in kind of a traditional mob city, and it does go there. But like in a traditional mob city, that's kind of what I feel like LA does for a lot of these people, is like, oh well, if it takes place in LA, it's I mean, I lived in New York and I know the actual feeling of walking around in New York being like, oh, I guess what I'm doing is more important because I'm here. And it's this juice that the city has, which is why people go there and try to find themselves and think they do and all that stuff. And LA has the same juice. Chicago has the same juice. Like people go there and like you feel, because you're on like the heartbeat or the pulse of society or humanity or America or the world in some of those places. Like that things are more important because they happen there. So anyway, that's kind of what I feel like sometimes people use LA as, whether it's intently used that way or that's Roman Polanski loved LA. So that's, yeah. But it is interesting. We both got to the same place when it's all said and done, and I'm glad that I like saw it through and watched it all, because
Yeah.
I don't like having such strong opinions about things that I haven't finished. I kind of
So
you know what I
why do you
mean?
hate it so much? I don't know. I never finished it.
Exactly.
I
Like
saw
there's
30 minutes
I
and I
don't
shut it off.
the ability to like just push through so that I can lay this
Confidently
spiteful
say.
stuff. Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure there's stuff too. I mean, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I'm sure I have a short list of movies that I struggled with, and once I finally either A, finished them from start to finish, or B, like revisited it 15 years later, I'm like, actually no, I really do enjoy this kind of a thing.
Hmm.
For a more interesting conversation too, like, rather than having three raves where we're all just, effusively praising things we liked about, it's interesting to hear, you know, it's subjective. You can have such fundamentally different responses to it. All right. Well, speaking of emotional journeys with movies, let's keep going backwards in time from 75 or sorry, 74 with Chinatown. We're going to go ahead in time to 75 with Cuckoo's Nest. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And Nicholson as the character of Randall McMurphy. And I first saw this in high school. And while this time that I saw Chinatown, scenes really stuck with me, I was surprised by how clearly and distinctly I remembered so much of this movie. And I don't know if it's because it's become such a big part of pop culture, but yeah, I just remembered all these key bits. McMurphy fighting with Nurse Ratched about the baseball game, the big spoilers for a 50-year-old movie, but the big kind of gut punch at the end with Brad Dourif's character committing suicide, uh, you know, Chief taking the water fountain and busting through that wall and kind of, you know, finding his freedom after smothering McMurphy. All that I just remembered clear as day, even though it's been like, 20 years since I've seen this movie. And Nicholson's performance here is such a strong anchor. He's got that manic energy that he would turn up to 11 in The Shining. He's got that same sly smugness that he plays perfectly in Five Easy Pieces. He's got that kind of too cool for school charisma that you see in Chinatown. But yeah, it deserves all the accolades it got. I think it won like all 5 major Academy Awards: Best Picture, Actor, Actress, Director, Screenplay. And yeah, I think it's a great movie that I really enjoyed, as emotionally devastating as it was. Would love to hear kind of what your experiences were with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest this time. Dustin, what did you think?
I like I said at the start, I first saw this probably in high school with my dad, and I remember being like profoundly like not touched by it, but like the intensity of it, and it like feeling very emotional in like the narrative and stuff. And I feel like maybe I didn't feel that quite as much this time, which I'm fine with. I watched it with my wife, who like largely did not enjoy it because she just didn't find it like, as we've talked about, like didn't find anyone to be particularly likable and rootable. And like to that extent, I had no recollection of like the crime that McMurphy did to land him in this position. And so finding out that it was like rape kind of, like initially soured me. And specifically the way he talks about it with the doctor at the beginning kind of like soured me on his character in a way that I don't recall it doing the first time. But I mean, I guess the other thing that I'll uh, note that I feel, this is my second time seeing it, is like not that Nurse Ratched is not a villain. She very clearly is the villain here. And not that she isn't villainous. I think in particular when she tells at the end uh Billy Brad Dourif's character, when she makes the comment about like what will your mom think, like she knows that's going to trigger him. I don't think she knew that it was going to trigger him to end his life per se, but like she did not have to say that. Like that was not germane to solving the situation that they were in. And that was clearly a malicious kind of move on her behalf. But like ultimately there's an angle I feel like to look at that character, and I don't think that's the intent of the writer and director and the author of the story is to look at this character this way. But like, if you try and look at the situation through her eyes, I think it's a lot easier than I remembered, and not to say it's super easy, but easier than I remembered to kind of like understand where she's coming from to a certain extent, or to like not to see how she justifies the decisions that she makes. And so like I thought that was kind of an interesting layer that I digested watching it this time, and that like in my internal narrative, having watched this for the first and only time 20 some years ago, I was like, oh, she's like a raging bitch in this entire movie, and like clearly is, maybe not screaming, but is like going toe to toe with him, and like bringing that same energy. And she does not. I mean, she's largely like pretty calm, cool, and collected, arguably like sociopathic in some ways. But like I think I came in with it, expecting her to be like matching his energy from what I misremembered. And like watching it this time, I'm like, no, like I mean, like I don't find her character empathetic or anything, but I find it like, oh, like, yeah, like you can tell that she thinks she's doing the right thing to a certain extent. And then I think at the very end with Billy is when that elevates to her being just malicious for the sake of being malicious.
Right. I mean, that's when the switch gets flipped kind of into more full-on villainous performance. But I think I had a very close experience, and I think it's what makes it such a great performance and what makes Nurse Ratched such a great villain is that she is, emotionally regulated. She is mostly in control of her her emotions and her delivery, and she even exudes what could be perceived as warmth or compassion in certain scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And there are
Mm-hmm.
little cues in the performance, like you know I always kept thinking about the actress who plays her. Why am I blanking on her
Louise
name?
Fletcher.
Louise Fletcher. She does such great work with her eyes, where even when she's like kind of saying things
Especially when
calmly or
she's getting
coolly.
strangled.
Yeah, especially when she's getting strangled. But even in like those scenes where she's leading therapy sessions, there's like this vague twinkle of kind of malicious glee. And I think that's where like the banality of evil kind of comes in with her character, because like she's clearly enjoying like exerting her control over these people, and clearly kind of enjoying pushing their buttons, and, you know, even if it's under the pretext of, I am doing this because it's what's best for you and I know best to like help with your mental health care, that little twinkle of malicious glee in her eyes, is very subtle, but I think it's just dialed in enough to make her, one of the all-time villains that people are still talking about.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I mean this movie. I don't remember when the first time I saw it. I've seen it countless times because it really tapped into, and still does. I haven't seen it. I probably hadn't seen it in a decade, but it really tapped into when I was younger. Just big anger at the world and the control that it exerts on you, and then the removal through lobotomization of McMurphy's, mind at the end, and the whole like the lines he says about like, yeah, she's a fucking cunt, and she likes a rigged game. That all that interplay and all that desire for control, and the the closing of the vote before McMurphy had been able to do it, just all these little things where she, and yeah, the line she says to Billy at the end, which is totally unnecessary, and also like the line she says to him in the therapy session when they're all having some kind of connection, and she brings it back down like, oh yeah, isn't that the first time you tried to kill yourself, Billy? And it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
God, dude, come on,
she
stop.
she's
Just,
provoking a response. She wants to
yeah.
trigger and push that button.
Yeah, and I mean, it is difficult to look back on the things that were done in this for the with the idea of mental health, but a little bit more at the idea of like control, which is a very difficult line, is a very blurred line, and knowing the intentions and stuff with what we were trying back then is like difficult to watch. But this movie makes me so viscerally angry
Mm-hmm.
about, and for me, the moment that always, I'm like upset thinking about it. For me, the moment that always really brings that home is when McMurphy finds out that most of the people in there are in there voluntarily.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember the first time, and all those side characters are amazing. Like
Oh yeah.
there is not a weak performance in this thing. I feel like
no,
it's just all those side characters are amazing. I love the scene on the boat where he doesn't call Harding a doctor. He's calling everyone else a doctor. It just just like those little things. And yeah, and it taps into, and I think it really. What's interesting is how much the movie is. I've appreciated it, and I guess enjoyed is the word, but like watched so many times. I've never actually read the book by Ken Kesey, which is maybe something I should do. But yeah, it just makes me so angry and I think it's a movie. It's one of the rare movies that I can watch and feel like I can tap into a little bit, as much as is possible through art. When you have not lived through a time period, the feeling of a time period, the feeling of when this movie came out and the things, when you think about the end of the 60s and into the 70s, and we're now in the mid 70s and like getting closer to the 80s, and like there's just that the loss of everything, everything, we're out there, we're having fun, we're doing crazy shit, and I mean, I totally agree with you on like watching this movie when I was 20 and hearing him talk about why he was going in before, I mean, hell, 20 years ago, right? Before all the things about just the level of horrific shit that has happened to women I mean, forever, but like more recently, it only gets worse and more damning as I get older.
Yeah.
That not that it wasn't ever, but like it just continues. The volume on that continues to go up every time I see it. And like I said, I think I saw it last time I was probably in the 30-ish. And so yeah, there isn't too many characters to root for. Although I will say Chief is
Yeah.
kind of a character to root for, but it's a difficult character to root for because he is muted for most of it, right? Like it's not like you're getting necessarily all that much, and
Yeah.
so I totally get how, but I think for me it really captures the angst, and oddly enough through a character who is not young in many respects, but like the angst of being young and controlled by things that you don't necessarily agree with. The other scene that really gets me, similar to the one him finding out that everyone is in there voluntarily, is when he's like, "Oh, I just got to deal with this for like 68 days," and the warden or the one of the
the
orderlies is just like,
yeah.
"Oh
Yeah.
no, nope, we have you
Yeah.
for as long as we want." And so there's, and there is like I mean, in a very fantastical sense, I am like rooting for Nurse Ratched to die at the end. Like I want him. I am just like, yes, get her. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, and just I mean, I do want, like, yeah, just burn the whole thing down. It's so, oh man,
It's the brilliance in that moment when he's in the pool and the order and he makes that comment about, I've got 68 days or whatever, is it hits two notes, right? Like it gives you that hopeless feeling that he's feeling in that moment of like, fuck, like I can't get out of here. And then also it underscores how incompetent he is as a person, that he put himself in this situation and had no concept of like what it meant, right? Like that he made the choices he did to make the legal system think that he was insane or mentally incompetent, that they put him in this place, but had no concept of like what that meant logistically for his legal situation and predicament until
yeah,
that moment, which is wild. Like it's just it's such an interesting choice to have a character like that who makes decisions that are so reprehensible and sloppy and incompetent, and then also be like your protagonist and your quote unquote hero. I want to point out, so after I watched this, I was like curious about the book and did some digging on like the characters in the book, and and typically how I choose, like I'm not a big like novel reader. I'm a voracious reader, but like articles and news stories and Wikipedia. And a lot of times what I choose, like for my own like head canon with movies and TV shows, is like if it's based on a book or another medium, and the movie adapts these characters from the book, but it doesn't change part of their backstory from the book, but it maybe just doesn't explain it, then I still think that their backstory is canon. And there was two characters that I found profoundly sad in terms of what their backstory was based on the blurbs Wikipedia talks about in the book that aren't portrayed in the movie, but there's nothing in the movie that's portrayed to the contrary. So I choose to believe this is still canon. And the first one is Bancini, and he's one of the chronics who was not self-committed in the institution on his own accord. He's the one that in the beginning when they're playing basketball on the court, that Nicholson climbs on his shoulders. And the description on Bancini and what is wrong with him is that Bancini had brain damage at birth but managed to hold down simple jobs such as a switch operator on a lightly used railroad branch line until the switches were automated and he lost his job, after which he was institutionalized. Now that's heartbreaking enough. The chief, because the chief is like the narrator in the book, the chief remembers how once and only once he lashed out violently against the aides, telling the other parents that he was a living miscarriage born dead. And that was like, I was like, holy shit. Like, and how he's portrayed in the movie is like not a goofball, but like just kind of like a weird guy, like, that just doesn't like, it's always talking about one thing and that's it. And then the background on the chief is really fascinating. And to your point, like Kyle, like if this had been better, or not better, but like had been implemented in the film, then he would truly be like the one person you want to root for. So he's been in the mental hospital since the end of World War II. He's presumed by staff and patients alike to be deaf and mute, and through this guise has become privy to many of the world's dirtiest secrets. As a young man, the chief was a high school football star, a college student, and a war hero. After seeing his father, a Native American chieftain, humiliated at the hands of the U.S. government and his white wife, Chief Bromden descends into clinical depression and begins hallucinating. Soon he is diagnosed with schizophrenia. He believes society is controlled by a large mechanized system which he calls the Combine. So there's like enough layers in that background that makes me want to like read the book and understand more of his character. But even some of the context of like, because we never get an indication of like why he's there, like any of that. And really, I mean, and I feel like deliberately so, like once he reveals to Nicholson that he is not mute and that he can speak, he seems like the sanest person there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in some ways you could argue that Nicholson's character is like the most insane person because of how stupid he is and the fact that he thought this was the right decision for him to like get out of
Right.
his legal
The
problems.
choices he makes that end him up here.
Yeah, are like indicative and in a much like a much more sick person than some of the people that are in there. So like I think that it's just that's there's so many layers to this that make it. I mean, I'm even feeling like talking about it more with you guys. Not that I like disliked it on the second viewing, but like I said before, like it wasn't as quite as profound to me. But talking through it more, I'm like, no, actually, like it really is like it's just a fucked up story. And like he's again, I mean, somewhat as a theme in these three movies, but Nicholson is like this character's not supposed to be likable. It's not demonstrating a likable character in a likable system kind of a thing, but it's using this intensely unlikable person to show a momentously flawed system and broken system that is under the oppressive thumb of a sociopath in Nurse Ratched, which we fully realize by the end of the movie. The last piece I'll say there is that like you could argue in headcanon that Ratched was in her mind. I mean, she conceivably knows why he's there, right? Like she's got to have access to that information of what he's doing in there and what his
Mm-hmm.
crime he committed and stuff. And so maybe she rationalized the lobotomy by the combination of how disruptive he was to the lives of the other patients, but also like the crime that he committed. And knowing, I mean, she's smart enough to know that he thought he was getting a good deal by going into the institution versus into prison.
Sure.
And so
I
it
mean,
is
that's one of the
it's
points the movie's making, right? It's that like institutional punishment is kind of indistinguishable from the way that we used to treat mental health conditions. Like, you know, it doesn't matter if he is mentally ill or a threat to the state in the eyes of the system that seeks to, you know, subdue him either way.
yeah. I mean, it's truly like like a textbook example of a catch-22, right? Like by him pretending he's insane that he needs to be in this institution versus in prison ultimately is an insane thing to do. And so like I mean it's kind of like a reverse catch 22 or something. um I feel like I've talked a lot here, but I think
Oh,
it's just
good.
it's really interesting to just think of like the yeah, I don't know, of just how fucking stupid his character is
Yeah.
across the board and all of his decisions. Because most of, I mean, as evident by the fact that once he learns that he is not getting out in 68 days, he like tries to like, I mean, he ultimately can't bring himself to do it, but like he tries to get in line because he suddenly realizes that it's not just a matter of a clicking like a ticking clock before he leaves. Nurse Ratched has to sign off on it, and he's done everything in his power to like make her life miserable, and so he's suddenly like, fuck, like I can't unring this bell. So like it's just, yeah, I don't know, I find it interesting. The other thing I find interesting about this movie, like my wife and I were trying to like talk about it a little bit after, is like, I mean, like I think the simple answer is like you could not make this today because
Mm.
there's not a equivalent system. I mean, systems in place for the mentally ill are still immensely flawed and broken, but you could not portray that today. And then I feel like if you tried to portray how it was 50 years ago in the 60s or 70s, you would also be running into like political correctness and things like that. And like
Yeah.
it's always interesting when I watch movies like this that are highly regarded like kind of cultural touch points, and I am always like asking myself the internal question of like, why hasn't someone remade this or tried to remake it? um Not, again, not that I think it needs to be remade, but it just seems like Hollywood today is so, you know, quick to just like do reboots and reimaginings of stuff. It's interesting to look back at a movie like this and kind of hypothesize of like, okay, like why something that is widely regarded as a classic and a great story, how come it hasn't been revisited? And I think the answer for this one is maybe easier than some other films, given the subject matter and the environment that it shows and things like that.
Yeah. And I think it's
And
deeply rooted in the 70s counterculture in kind of a similar way as Five Easy Pieces is, where you can read, like, you know, it works on a metaphorical level where, you know, this institution and this oppression that's being, you know, exhibited on these patients is kind of, you know, a metaphor for 70s you know, civil unrest and kind of just the counterculture that rose in response to that. And one thing you kept going back to, Justin, that's interesting is kind of the unlikability of McMurphy. And I think that's a feature of this movie, not a bug. And one thing that makes it really compelling is that that tension, that huge contradiction between McMurphy as the statutory rapist who exhibits violence against women, who, like, you know, throttles and nearly kills Nurse Ratched, however much she might deserve it at that point, and McMurphy is like the lovable rapscallion who, like, you know, shakes things up and takes these, you know, these patients and shows them that life is worth living. Like, I think, you know, they're two very different dimensions to his character that, you know, even if it doesn't make him likable, I think he brings enough charisma in those scenes where he's, you know, taking them fishing, even when he's bringing the prostitutes in at the very end, and kind of they're all getting drunk. Like, you know, there's enough like kind of cheeky, you know, revelry to like to soften you just enough to his character.
Yeah.
well,
Well,
there's
and he
there's
does
there's
it.
a there's a little bit in McMurphy as well with what you're saying there, Alex. It's like that period of time and that loss of, I don't necessarily want to say innocence in the 60s, but like that loss of pure enlightenment, that loss of enlightenment, I guess you could say, in the 60s, or whatever, perceived enlightenment, and then getting back into, fucking getting back to Vietnam, and like getting back into all, and like that period of time in the early 70s to the mid 70s, and then into the 80s, where it's just like cocaine and business, and I mean, a whole different set of rules. There's a little bit to me in McMurphy's character in this movie, in this story, that's like, oh, you don't get any more white knights. You don't get any more heroes. You want enlightenment again? You're gonna have to get dirty. You know what I mean? Like, you look at
Mhm.
Billy, who isn't necessarily a paragon of enlightenment or anything, but like, he's the innocent character in a lot of ways in this
Yeah, there's a
story,
purity
and
to him.
he gets his moment of becoming, in a lot of ways, from McMurphy bringing in these friends who are, hookers, prostitutes, loose women, whatever you want to call it, or as they would, say in Lonesome Dove, sporting women. And yeah, I that to me is something interesting, that there's like, and then even the orderly, that's like, oh yeah, you guys can come in, let's have a good time tonight, let's party down. There's a
Scatman
little bit of
Crothers.
like,
Yeah, Scatman
yeah,
friggin' Crothers, man.
there's a little bit of, you have to, yeah, you don't get any more white knights. Like, this is who's going to
Yeah,
bring you. This is who you're going to have to follow to get to the other side of whatever this is. And that even is reflected in like the Harding and McMurphy relationship, of like this person who's extremely resistant to this character and what he's bringing, even though he's there voluntarily, and even though he's like, yeah, but I see, this like trying to live and have an exciting relationship to being alive. What that kind of character can tease out of people, and what it says about the current state of the world at that time and how people were feeling.
I think I mean, my last note here too, to like just kind of amplify what you just said, Kyle, is like, I think, and to maybe course correct from my lamenting on how unlikable McMurphy is as a character, like what Nicholson does so exceptionally well here is you're introduced to him and you learn the worst thing you can about him, why he's in prison, and it's not like he robbed a bank or did something that didn't harm someone. It was truly like one of the more detestable things you can do. But then the rest of the movie, he I don't want to. I mean, he does enough to make you root for him. And if you're not rooting for him, you're at least like supportive of him, because like when he takes all the guys on the boat cruise, like when he hijacks the bus, like I thought he was going to escape. Like he could have easily just like walked off and probably gotten caught down the line or whatever. But like instead he like is like, no, like these are my friends. I want to take them out on a boat. Like you don't do that if with these people that have mental illnesses and stuff unless you genuinely like enjoyed their company, or at least some of their company and things like that. Or at the end when he is about to escape, but then he has the opportunity to help Billy get
Right.
laid, and to him is a positive kind of a thing. So he stays and truly walks away from his opportunity to escape at the end, ultimately to his downfall. But like those are moments where you're like, no, like he's maybe it's not necessarily redemption, but he's like he's a good guy in that context. And like for me, like watching it, as evident by the fact that I did not remember what he did as a crime, and I had in my head assumed he had robbed a bank or something like that. He's charismatic enough as an actor playing that role that you're like, yeah, like I support him. Like, yeah, fuck Nurse Ratched. Like, yeah, like you should be able to watch a fucking baseball game. Why can't you watch a fucking baseball
Hmm.
game? Like, all of that stuff is Nicholson, like pitch perfect performance that makes you root for him, and him delivering on these beats that like kind of just underscores that, yeah, you should be rooting for this guy because he, to some extent, however misaligned and poorly executed, like cares about these other guys in here and wants to do well by them. It's not
Sure.
just about fucking the system. and fucking with Nurse Ratched. Like there's some degree of it where he has empathy and affection for his fellow residents of the asylum that he wants to support them, kind of a thing.
And there's always like that tension where even when he's doing things that are, you know, again, like to help them come out of their shells, to have a good time, giving like hard liquor to people who are severely medicated and could have like serious fucking complications. Like that's very much like reckless endangerment. So, I think it's never purely like black and white, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
the good-natured humanity shading out the statutory rape, or like the kind of reckless choices he makes where like is he showing them how to live, and is he showing them to like perceive life outside of the institutionalization that they've been committed to. Yeah, but he's also like, there is a degree of risk that he's exposing them to, that
Yeah,
Nurse Ratched, for all of her evilness, some of that desire for control in her mind, I think, is to protect them from those things.
yeah. But it's like it's not like for him, at least I don't interpret it as like malicious exposure to that risk. Like
No, no, definitely not.
that's just the groove in life, the level at which he lives at, and that's to
Right.
him what is a good life. And he wants to
He wants them to
expose,
ride that wave with him.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, which is severely flawed and totally wrong and like morally like unideal, which as we as the viewers see and conceive. But the fact that he's trying to impact upon these individuals what he finds as positives in life, however negative it ultimately may be to them, I like makes you think, like feel like, oh, like he's, again, it's hard to, like, the easy thing to say is, oh, he's a good guy. I never felt like he's a good guy, but like I felt like he was genuine, right? Like he
Yes.
was doing these things genuinely, not just to fuck with people besides Nurse Ratched. And I think that's what makes it so compelling. It's like why I was able, at least, to like still be invested in what he's doing as a character, despite I know how despicable and stupid he is ultimately he seems to care about these other people.
Right.
That might be
And
a
makes it
good. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and just makes it so heartbreaking what ultimately happens to him at the end. Like you wouldn't have that tragedy and that pathos of, the lobotomy and Chief putting him out of his misery without the sense that like he really does care and he really is a genuine guy.
Yeah,
And maybe that's a good pivot point to a character who is fundamentally incapable of being genuine in any way and is terrified of genuine emotion. And we can talk about Five Easy Pieces and Bobby DeP. Um, and this movie got on my radar because one of my good friends, shout out to MC, recommended this movie a while back, said it's one of his favorites. And I was not really aware of its cultural impact or just status in film history. And I really really love this movie. It felt like I was reading a great short story, and it felt like a really complete and robust character study of Bobby DeP, this former childhood piano prodigy who goes on to basically be a restless kind of drifter in a California oil field, and what his homecoming is like, and him reconciling with these different parts of himself. And yeah, maybe we can start with kind of that beginning section of the movie that takes place in California, where you're just kind of a fly on the wall for his life, where he's going through his blue collar job, where he's spending time with his girlfriend Rayette, played by Karen Black. And yeah, he is immediately characterized as not a good dude. He's belittling and shitty to Rayette at the bowling alley when he like kind of insults her. You know,
He's truly awful. He's truly
Yeah.
awful.
he's a total piece of shit to her, like from the get-go. You know, you're not really given a chance to, you know, empathize or identify with him before, like, you know, there's that scene in the car where he's berating her and she's kind of, you know, tears streaming down her face talking about committing suicide, and you're like, wow. And the way that the movie slowly kind of peels back the onion to reveal that, like, there is some interiority there and there is, like, you know, a human being behind like that shitty behavior. Yeah, I dug the journey this movie took me on, even if I do ultimately find Bobby DeP a pretty detestable human being. Yeah, I would love to get into kind of what you guys thought of this as a character study.
I hated this movie from the beginning until the last shot, and the last shot was incredible and well executed, dramatic. I mean, amazing, amazing. I was shocked after watching this movie to read that anyone had liked it. I was shocked to read that it was a part
Wow.
of some new Hollywood movement. I read through a bunch of reviews talking about it as this ode to alienation and like the character study and all this stuff. I This is a movie that I don't know I don't know how often I've had this experience with a movie. I watched this movie with a friend, thank goodness, because I don't know how if I would have been able to watch it if we weren't together. And it's a friend that I like watch movies with, and weird movies and good movies, but also like out there movies, push boundary movies. And we were both multiple times turning to each other during it, being like, "What are we watching right now? What are we supposed to be getting from this? What like why what is the pacing? The pacing felt so fast, and for the first time in my life, we were watching, and I turned to him and I'm like, how much longer is in this movie? Because there needs to be like 7 hours more for me to understand this person and like the depth and why I should care and why I shouldn't just pigeonhole him as a horrible human being. I don't care about the past. The past that I'm showed is not redeeming at all. The way he deals with Rayette and his family is so reprehensible and unforgivable, no matter where he comes from, that I don't care about his plight. And so we're like, how much longer is in this movie? I hope a long time. And we pause it to see how much time is left. And we're like an hour and 26 minutes in, and it's going to be over in like 30 seconds. And we look at each other and we go, what the fuck are you talking about right now? This movie is over?
Wait, so where were you at like when they left the house? If
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
okay.
Before they get to the gas station.
Okay.
And I just had the conversation with the dad, who doesn't say anything. And yeah, it was, and for me, the scene where this movie lost the ability to redeem this character in any way, not that it's even trying to do that. And I don't want to say that it's trying to do that because it is not trying to do that
No, it's not at all.
No.
No.
at all. But
I do think it's trying to, and I'll talk
humanize.
about this more in a second, humanize it, but I do feel like part of why I liked it is because I feel like is that there was multiple points where you're like, oh, he's gonna maybe not fully redeem himself, but he's gonna turn a corner here, and he never fucking does.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
And
interested.
that's deliberate. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
for sure. Again, a movie that accomplished its goal, I think. But yeah, like the scene for me where I'm just kind of lost, right? I'm along for the ride in the first part with the blue collar stuff and the playing the piano and the on the truck bed and all that stuff, and this relationship he has with this other guy who's like just kind of happy with his kid and his wife, and we go bowling and it's totally fine. This is just what it is. The scene where he is talking to that character, who I cannot remember his name, about having potentially knocked up Rayette and just gonna bail on it, and that
Elton is
character,
his name.
Alton, that character essentially being like, yeah, that would be a really shitty thing to do. And I don't know how I would feel about a person that did that type of thing. And that Jack Nicholson's character, amazing acting performance, incredible by Nicholson, just amazing from
Mm-hmm.
top to bottom.
Hmm.
The whole movie, but this character's response to that is so detestable
Oh
that
yeah.
I just
Yeah,
don't fucking care about him anymore. And I'm
Oh
not
yeah.
interested in his character study. I'm not interested in his background. You have soured yourself beyond any. I don't need you to be redeemed. I just need to care about watching your story unfold, and I need to care about learning about your complexity. And that response was so simple of like, well, yeah, well, fuck you. And just trying to run away from it, that I was like, no, because if you want me to be interested in a character's complexity, I need more complexity. And
that's
and
so
and
funny because I'm gonna jump in real quick because that is the exact scene. That's the exact moment that I locked into this as a character study because it was like the shittiness of that response where Elton is basically like, would that be so bad, like, if you like had a kid and like had this life, and his just revulsion and like disgust and fear is like this cocktail that happens instantly, and then he lashes out because he's the biggest coward imaginable, and he is so scared of like that stagnation that would imply. And he like he wants to be this blue collar guy, but he has such deep resentments and like kind of thinly veiled disgust for these people and their lifestyles. And that's the moment for me where the mask comes off, and he's not able to hide that he's just kind of an elitist arrogant jerk who thinks he's better than these people. And that's so interesting because that's the exact scene and moment where I was like, I want to know, I want to know what made this guy this shitty. I want to know like where this fear comes from, and like you know what could lead him to like have such a visceral reaction to like you know basically at this point like a friend showing him humanity and being like, that wouldn't be so bad, like to have this lifestyle. And he just reacts with revulsion.
Yeah.
yeah,
I
and I
think
mean, one thing, Dustin, before you jump in, the what you said there about like the mask being removed and he thinks he's better. Like, I don't get anything from this character that he thinks he's better than other people. He just hates himself and he's trying to like cover it up. So for me, that would, if I had that reading of it, I would be like a little bit more tuned in. But yeah, it just, no, it's just so,
No,
yeah, it
that's
was just,
totally valid.
yeah. But I'm curious, Dustin. What do you got? Because
well
you never seen this either, like me. And has
no,
none of us
yeah.
seen this movie before?
No, this was a blind spot for
No,
all three of us.
blind spot for
Yeah.
all of us. Okay.
And I mean, for me at least, like a huge, like not just a blind spot, and like, oh, that's on my list. Like, I had no concept or idea of like what this movie was or anything. I mean, I when I think of something I started doing, like you know how on Letterboxd you can review a movie like 1.5 stars, 1 to 5 stars, but you can also heart it. Like I've started hearting a movie, liking a movie if it's a movie that I would rewatch, like revisit. Um, and this is one that I gave 4.5 stars, and I did not like it. Like I do not have any desire to rewatch this movie because it
Hmm.
is a miserable movie. And that's part of why I liked it so much. Like it's the kind of movie where if someone came to me and said, I'm thinking of watching Five Easy Pieces, should I watch it? I'd say absolutely. If it's something that popped up on your radar and you think you want to watch it, you should absolutely watch it. If someone came to me and said, hey, do you want to recommend a movie to me? Like I would not recommend this movie to you because you have to like kind of want to see it yourself. And then I think you're at least hooked enough into it where it might be interesting. But I think part of for me why I love this so much is because of Nicholson's performance. He's like so charismatic, especially at this stage in his career when he's young. And like, for me, it was like exciting to see him in his youngest role. Like, I don't like just being kind of like youthful and whatnot. But then everything he does is like miserable and detestable. And like I was saying before, there's a couple different moments where, and it's nothing super bold where he like saves a dog from getting hit by a car or rescues a kid that's drowning or something like that's like, oh, like this is his redemption arc or anything. But there's moments here and there where you're like, oh, like when you see him when he goes in and sees his sister when she's recording the classical music thing, like that's kind of like oh, he has like a positive-ish relationship with her. Also, the
Right.
actress that plays his sister is Helen Hunt's aunt from Twister.
Yep.
Fun fact for you.
I pegged that immediately. She walked on screen and my buddy was
Yeah.
like, "Who is that?" And I was like, "That is the mom from Twister." And he was like, "Holy shit!"
Yep,
She's
yep.
also the creepy plant lady from Minority Report is where I caught
Minority
her.
Report as
Oh
well. Yes.
yeah.
Yep.
But there's that moment. I think that the other huge one is towards the end when all the like the annoying intellectual lady is blabbing on about some intellectual bullshit, and like
Right. And he
Rayette is
sticks up
trying.
for Rayette.
You think he's sticking up for Rayette, and then pretty quickly you realize, like, oh no, like he just fucking hates them all,
Right.
and wasn't really like he wasn't interested in defending Rayette. He was just fucking sick of that lady's bullshit. It could have just as easily been anyone else in the room that said that, and he would have had the same reaction. It wasn't about Rayette. But like that was the moment initially where it's like, oh yeah, like okay, like he does care about it. He does. No, he doesn't. Like
Right.
it's
And to
very
Kyle's
quickly you,
point, I think he also hates himself and he sees
yeah,
himself in that lady's monologue.
yes, absolutely. And so like I just thought it was like I don't, without Nicholson and his performance, like this movie would have been fucking miserable. I mean, it was miserable, like truly miserable, unwatchable miserable to me. But like he like I like Nicholson enough that like I think he's going to turn a corner somehow and maybe not fully redeem himself in the course of the movie narrative, but like at least, inch in the right direction. And you like another note of that is at the end when he leaves, and he leaves with Rayette, and who knows, like they drive off into the sunset, whatever. But no, he fucking abandons her at the
He
goddamn
abandons
gas
her.
station. Like truly the darkest fucking shit to do as a human being. And to
Especially
me,
her.
like, yeah. And like in that's, it's one thing to like get her home and then leave her. But like the way he did that, and I mean, the fact that you could tell when he got in the car and the truck driver was like, don't you have a coat? And he was like, no, it burned up. And the driver's like, oh, I got a coat behind the seat. You can grab that. And he's like, no, I'm fine. And then he says, I'm fine like 7 times. Like you can see something, some gear moving in his head of like the fact that he like doesn't know what he's doing. And not that he's terrified, but like he just truly is like listless in the most miserable way. Like this movie made me feel better about all of my boring life decisions, and that I actually was willing to make decisions in my life. And like, yeah, I think why I enjoyed this, again, not a movie like maybe in 7 or 8 years, if somebody I enjoy the company of wants to revisit this, I will. But like I have no interest in like sitting down by myself and watching this again, because it truly made me like a detestable character who was, I don't want to say a joy to watch, but was fascinating to watch because of how Nicholson portrayed him. And like I
Yeah.
said, there was enough of those moments where I was like, oh, he's gonna do something like not even redeemable, but likable. Like, oh, he's gonna be likable for a split second, and then he never is. Anything he does that you think is like decent is either a means to a different end of his own like aimless direction, or like it's almost like he catches himself mid likable action and is like, actually that's not being a dick enough, let me pivot how I'm like responding to this person to be an asshole again, kind of a thing. I mean, even the shit like I would argue like the most likable thing he does, but it also just speaks to how aimless his character is and how like he's incapable of like analyzing a situation and like making a rational choice is right after he gets in that fight with Elton about getting Ray pregnant, and then he goes and tells the foreman that he's quitting, which I love the foreman's like nonplussed response of
Yeah, he
like,
doesn't give a shit.
I'm happy the two of you get out of here or whatever. But then Elton's getting arrested by cops, and he like Bobby just runs and starts beating up the cops without digesting what's happening at all. And Elton even tells him like, don't waste your time. They've got the right to do what they're doing. Um,
Yeah,
this speaks to like how he's incapable of making a logical choice or an educated choice. But that moment's probably like the most altruistic in that moment because he's like trying to defend his friend, but he doesn't even know why. Like it just kind of speaks to his character's like inability to think a single step ahead in his life decision making process. I The last thing I'll say is that I think it is also like a brilliant kind of narrative choice to like you see how miserable he is as a person, how shitty he treats Rayette, how much he looks down upon the friends he associates with, and that whole beginning
hmm
first act kind of thing. And then he goes home, and you expect his home life to be miserable or like there to be this unveiling of like and not that there wasn't. I mean, maybe he was abused at his dad, maybe I missed some sort of subtext there or whatever, but like his sister's nice, his brother is affable enough, like his dad is mute and whatnot, but like his home life doesn't seem like it was arguably that traumatizing. And it just like kind of underscores of like how miserable of a person he is, the fact that it's not like he came from squalor or that he came
right.
from like this miserable place at home. It's just that like no, he just like it's a shit human.
Yeah,
And like every decision he makes serves to underscore and impress upon you as the viewer of like, do not like this person, you will not root for this person. But for me, I'm like compelled to watch this person be a shit human because it's Jack Nicholson turning in an amazing performance.
yeah. I totally agree with that, and I think you do get enough elements of, there's no like unlocking of some trauma that caused him to be a shit heel, but I think you get enough clues for like what he's afraid of and what he's running from, where there's the scene where he's playing Chopin for Catherine on the piano, and the camera's like panning over these photographs of all of his like family members and relatives, and they're all like musical prodigies, and it's like multiple generations, of photos, and that comes back later when he's having that conversation with his dad, the monologue he has with his dad, where he's like, I'm afraid of auspicious beginnings. I think he is so terrified of being like stagnant, of being stuck in one place, or of being like, fitted into a box that was preordained for him. Like, when you're that talented, that young, like, there's kind of an arc and a trajectory to your life where it's totally mapped out. Like, you know, he could have stayed in, the Puget Sound in Washington with his siblings and like continue to live a ritzy life and be, a piano master. But I think for him, he's so scared of like having that future predetermined that he just sabotages anything and everything, and always has to keep moving at no expense. And I saw this movie probably 3 to 4 weeks ago at this point, and just on the subject of Nicholson's performance, I can't fucking stop thinking about that single tear that he squeezes out during that monologue, and how like precise of an acting moment it is, and how like well calibrated it is. because I often one of my preconceptions about Nicholson coming into this is that he's someone who, you know, always plays some version of himself and kind of has this natural energy and charisma that, can overshadow the individual character he's playing. Whereas Bobby DePee is just such a finely tuned performance. He is playing this role like an instrument, and yeah, it's a small thing, and I know crying on command isn't like a Herculean feat for an actor, but there's something that's just so precise about that tear that he squeezes out that I can't stop thinking about that moment.
We're all thinking about that moment right now.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is a good. Do you guys
really,
have any other thoughts you want to share before we do our rankings and wrap up?
I just want to ask. So, Kyle, I'll say that I think in our text conversations, I was totally caught off guard tonight in hearing how much you hated Chinatown, because when I texted and
Same.
said like Chinatown was like fucking awesome, you responded and said we should start a list of movies where Dustin and I agree on them, and I thought that was you affirming that you agreed on Chinatown.
Same.
I know
Same.
it was. I know it was. Oh, I know it was.
That
I
was
know it was.
a
As
good
soon as
red herring,
you
sir.
said that, I knew. Like, I was like, oh, they're both gonna think. They're both gonna think. No.
Very,
Yeah,
very
yeah. But I
fitting
was like,
misdirect.
I'm gonna
that
lay in the
that
cut. I'm gonna lay in the
so
cut.
that threw me off. But I'm curious with this one, like I get the impression from you very clearly that like this is that you're like me and that like you have no desire to rewatch Five Easy Pieces.
Correct.
But you were saying earlier that you thought the ending was phenomenal and that you
Mm-hmm.
thought Nicholson's performance throughout the whole movie was phenomenal. So like if you had to rate this on a scale of 1 to 5, like what would you rate it as? Or if that's too hard to answer, what was
No,
that?
I mean probably a 3.
Okay. Like are you glad you watched it?
No.
Okay. Okay.
I
Fair.
respect that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair.
There are some movies that I don't like or that I don't respond to that have similar, not similar, they're not really similar at all to this movie, but movies that there's many ways I come out of watching movies, but maybe that there's like 5 buckets that a lot of them fall into, and that's like absolutely loved it, can't stop talking about it, like loved it, but I'm not talking about it, kind of in the middle, just like, yeah, that was good, fine, liked it, hated it, and then hated it in a way where I want to keep talking about it, and
Uh-huh.
hated it in a way where I want to keep talking about it can sometimes completely change into actually loving it and
Uh-huh.
not being able to stop talking about it. And 2 movies like this for me were the Tree of Life, with
Nice.
Pitt and Penn and all that. Tree of Life. I came out of that movie, hated it so much, and then had like a 2.5 hour conversation in the parking lot with my friend about it, and then changed my whole feeling on it. And another one recent, it would be Cloud Atlas,
Okay.
where
Interesting. I haven't seen either of those.
oh, interesting. Well, we'll get to it. But yeah, no, this is not a movie that I felt. Yeah, nope. That a simple answer to your question is like, no, I'm not like happy I watched it. I don't think and why, something. I Acting is amazing, and it can draw me in, and it can give me enough to go on and to really enjoy. But shots, interesting shots, do more for me
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to the I'm happy I watched it. And that last shot with how it's so far out, and for the most part in this movie, we've been right on people's faces. We have
Yeah,
been
real
Yeah.
right,
close.
real close. And so that shot where they're way out there and she's walking around and she's yet to figure it out, and the sound of that truck going away, which is a sound we all know extremely well of a big diesel truck like going away from you on a highway, and that yeah that to me was like what I want in movie making. And I can love acting, but it usually is not enough for me to be like that full picture in. Um, and so yeah, I just and that's something I felt with Chinatown as well. Like I didn't, there wasn't enough camera work that I thought was interesting. None of
Mm-hmm.
it was bad, but there wasn't enough camera
Yeah.
work that I thought was interesting to really draw me in. And yeah, yeah.
No, well
Okay.
said.
Let's do our proper rankings here. Why don't
Yeah,
Alex?
absolutely.
Why
And
don't you kick us off?
yeah, so I think it could be fun to do our rankings, least favorite to favorite, 3, 2, 1, but also my favorite Nicholson performances are different than my favorite of these three movies. So I'm going to do both of those. So, for example, my least favorite of these was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I still really really enjoyed. Five Easy Pieces is number two, and Chinatown is number one. In terms of Nicholson performances, I would say Chinatown was my least favorite performance, followed by Cuckoo's Nest, and then Five Easy Pieces was my favorite. What about you guys, Dustin?
I think I'd probably agree with that. That exact same order, like because you put Chinatown for the movie at one, right?
I did.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you said that like 20 seconds ago. It's late. Yeah, I think that I found like the story wise, like in some ways, like Chinatown is the movie that I'm like most interested in revisiting, and that for me feels like the most that maybe almost gets better with age in a way. Like and Cuckoo's Nest to me feels the one that like ages the worst for fairly obvious reasons, and then um Five Easy Pieces, like story wise, I think fits in the middle for me there. But like performance wise, like yeah, Nicholson's performance in Five Easy Pieces like trumps all the other ones. Like there's so much more going on in those other two movies that
Right.
rose to the same level of interest as his performance. Whereas like if you take him and his performance out of Five Easy Pieces, like that movie has nothing going for it whatsoever. Like that makes or breaks the movie for me. So yeah, I would at the risk of being unoriginal, copy your exact same ranking.
Kyle, what about you?
Yeah, no, I got Cuckoo's Nest number one, and that's my favorite performance of all of these. I have Chinatown number two, and then I have Five Easy Pieces number three. But the Five Easy Pieces, acting job is better than the Chinatown job. I was actually thinking, and it's something that I obviously meant to say but didn't earlier, when you were like, "Oh, you can't remake One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest anymore," which I totally agree with. I think it'd be very difficult. If you did, it would pretty much. I was thinking, like, how would you actually do that if you were trying to get this tone in some way? And it would almost
Mm-hmm.
you'd have to be like in a cult. You'd have to be like Jack Nicholson would have to be like a new his character would have to be like a new member in a cult that like stirs shit up, and
Mm-hmm.
he's and you know what I mean. But you couldn't have it in this like in this anyway. That was the thought that I wanted to share, because I was like, how would you do this? And that's kind of how I feel, because you need this level of control and this level of closed offness and this level of like people are there voluntarily. But anyway, so yeah, that's my ranking. I'm happy I can say things about Chinatown now more effectively. You know, it's the point of the podcast to push our
Yeah.
boundaries. So
Well, and like you
yeah.
said, like it's easy. I'd much rather be able to like watch something all the way through and be able to like rationalize my dislike for something versus having like false started it multiple times. I think we've all been there, and and as we talked about, like sometimes that restarting it and getting your way through can alter your perception of it and things like that. And maybe years down the line you might come around to these movies in some way. Like maybe you're just not old enough to be like, you got to be like a middle-aged man to like really get into the cinema noir. And so you're gonna like hit 50 and all of a sudden you're gonna be like, oh, I really like these old movies of the old days kind
I
of a
need more Humphrey
thing.
Bogart in my life. Let's
Yeah.
get into some shit.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh man. I recently tried to watch Casablanca too. No. Yeah, well, we're gonna switch it up next week. Next episode, next recording. I'm gonna try. It's my pick, so I mean, frankly, I needed a little palate cleanser after this one
Oh, for sure.
I needed a little
Mhm.
palate
Yeah,
cleanser.
we got a
So
little dark.
yeah, well, that's why I wanted to go with Booksmart, because the Booksmart is a movie. It's all female directors, and not necessarily because of, but like they do all happen to have a lot of strong female characters and female leads. So Booksmart by Wilde, which I think can very easily be seen as just like the female Superbad, but I would caution you against that viewing of it. And then Little Women by Greta Gerwig, because it's one I haven't seen of Greta Gerwig, and I've really appreciated all that she's done. And so I'm curious about that one. That's a blind spot for me on her catalog. And then what is my third one? Not Little Women.
Promising Young
It was
Woman.
Promising
Yes,
Young Woman.
promising young
Yes,
women.
Yeah.
with Carey Mulligan. And yeah, movie I saw a while ago. Appreciated. Good for a rewatch and good for like an interesting tone for a film and all that. But that's all I'll say. We'll get to that next week.
Very
All right.
much looking forward. This was great. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you guys next time.